And now a message from our friends at Fetching Food.
The 1970s and 80s had elbow, gravy train, Purina, Meow Mix, and bell bottoms. You've changed your clothes, now change how you feed your pet. Like bell bottoms, kick the kibble and join us in the 21st century with the healthiest diet for dogs and cats. Feed naturally, feed raw, feed Fetching Foods.
I got worms.
I beg your pardon?
That's what we're going to call it. I got worms. We're going to specialize in selling worm farms. You know, like ant farms.
Hello, pups and kittens, and welcome to the opening of Insect-Based Diet, the series, on the Groomer Next Door podcast. I'm your host, Chris Green, and joining us to kick off this wonderful conversation is Dr. Jarrod Goldin. He is the co-founder of ENTOMO Farms up in the wonderful Canada. Well, we have been really lucky this year to do our second series when it comes to alternative nutrition for our pets. And what's great about this series is it's not just about our pets, but it is something we also can indulge in. I'm not sure yet if I'm actually brave enough to go down this rabbit hole, but you know what? If the opportunity comes out, I will definitely do it. Well, let's go into our unique fact of the week. Crickets were named for the sounds that they make. The word cricket comes from the old French word criquet and refers to the cricket's song. People once thought that those repeated chirps sounded like cricket, cricket, cricket. Interesting, though, the name of the sport of cricket has a totally different origin. It comes from an old French word for goalpost. Didn't know that. Well, by that sound, Dr. Jarrod Goldin is about to enter the podcast studio and kick off this interesting and wonderful series. So with that said, welcome Dr. Jarrod Goldin to the podcast.
Attention, passengers. We are now landing in Toronto, Canada, and the time is currently on your watch. Thank you for traveling with us.
This week on our insect-based diet series, we are actually joined by Dr. Jarrod Goldin. He is the co-founder of ENTOMO Farms, and I am so interested in this topic, so thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It is an absolute pleasure. I always like to start off everything with origin stories. And since we have two different versions here, we've got your origin story, and we also have ENTOMO Farms origin story. So let's start with your origin story and all about you to start with.
All right, fantastic. I am a South African born. I immigrated to Canada with my whole family in 1987, and I've been involved as a chiropractic educator. I'm a chiropractor, so very interested in health and the relationship between human health and what we eat, as well as the planet around us and how that can sustain life. So I've always had a keen interest in the environment and health, and live here in Toronto, just outside of the city, and have a lovely family, in business with my brothers for the last few years, which has been awesome. I have a dog named Miles Davis.
I like it. South Africa, interesting. Now, out of curiosity, why Canada? From South Africa to Canada, what was the correlation there?
I think my father felt it was a good country with good prospects and good opportunity, and he had a business opportunity here himself, and was brave enough to pick up his family and try to provide them better opportunities, along with my mom, of course, and bring us out to Canada.
Love it. Absolutely love it. That's so cool. Now, fast forward, how did ENTOMO Farms begin?
Basically, in 2013, the United Nations and the Food and Agriculture Organization put out a white paper, like a book almost, and the title was Edible Insects, Future Prospects for Food and Feed Security. And around the same time, there was a gentleman on Shark Tank pitching a protein bar made out of cricket powder.
Mm-hmm.
And my brothers had been farming insects for the reptile trade for years and had started looking into a bit about, using insects for food. And I always thought it would be fun to join them in business one day and was just waiting for the right opportunity. So when the UN and FAO put out that document, Edible Insects, Future Prospects for Food and Feed Security, and there was somebody on Shark Tank pitching a protein bar with cricket powder, and Mark Cuban invested in his business, I called my brothers up right away and said, I think this is the opportunity we've been looking for. Why don't we raise some capital and see if we can start, North America's first human-grade edible insect farm. And that was January 2014. We raised some money. We built out a 5,000 square foot farm. And to date, we've grown that into 60,000 square feet, and we're about to add another 40 and a nice almost 2,000 square foot processing facility. And the category's grown quite nicely.
I would say out of all insect farming that I've seen, you are the number one. And this is completely just statistically and honestly by reputation. For something that's only 4 years, no, thank you for doing what you're doing. But in such a short time, you have grown this into such a massive business that honestly, the sky is the limit. It is amazing. I have to say congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you. And, obviously we feel the same way. It's been a lifestyle. People ask me, do you work at this time? Do you work at that time? I told them it's not. It's called the lifestyle. It's not even hours of work. And it doesn't feel like a job. We really are passionate about what we're doing. We care a great deal about doing things that are good for people, good for pets, good for the planet. The three vital P's. And we're really excited about what the future, how the future looks. I totally agree.
I think it's amazing. Let's go into the name ENTOMO Farms. How does that come about, and explain just the origin to that?
Sure. So ENTOMO, E-N-T-O-M for Mary O, is the root for entomophagy, which is the eating of insects, or entomology, which is the study of insects. So we decided that it was appropriate that we wanted it to be known as the insect farm, like entomophagy, entomology, and ENTOMO Farms. I like
it. It's simple and it actually makes sense. I looked at it, I was like, I'm seeing that there's possibly a hidden meaning there. Sometimes it does happen, so it was a curiosity to me.
No, nothing hidden.
There's nothing hidden. Too bad. The lifespan on a cricket is 6 weeks, approximately?
Yeah, approximately 6 weeks, and it's one of our arguments, if you will, for the kind of humane treatment of the animal, that insects live about 6 to 7 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So we're culling them or harvesting them at the end of their life cycles, where many other farmed livestock are culled or cultivated way before they've lived a long, I don't know if you could say fruitful life, but certainly a long life.
Right. I mean, you look at cows. I mean, they're slaughtered at such a young age. I mean, there's so much life that they could have lived. So
yes.
You guys actually, they get a great life. They get their normal life. And then when it's ending, there is an actual source here that you guys are actually using, which makes sense instead of just going to waste.
Yeah.
What's the lifespan on a mealworm?
That is a great question. I'm not sure. I think it's a little bit longer because they have two cycles. They have the beetle cycle and the worm cycle. But I don't know the answer to that question. I'm more than happy to get it for you, and you could add it to your materials.
No, that's totally cool. I was just off the top of the head. I was just always wondering, because they're two very interesting, interesting insects that honestly the amount of nutrition that's involved is just crazy. How do you
Yeah.
actually farm insects? Because that's something that I'm just completely curious about.
So we basically retrofit abandoned chicken barns. So we look for these chicken barns that aren't being used, and then we retrofit them to become cricket farms. And that's basically the model we're using now.
Interesting. Because, of course, the stereotype of a farm is a barn and just open fields. And I'm just thinking to myself, that's obviously impossible. So I'm thinking, okay, how would that work? So that makes sense. Now, are they all in one pen? Is there kind of like multiple areas?
Yeah, so the traditional kind of way that it was done is that they were raised in these big dining room table sized shoe boxes.
Huh.
And you would have multiple shoe boxes in a 20,000 square foot space. But we've gone to an open plan concept, if you will. So we don't farm them that way. We put these condos, these cardboard dividers where the crickets can burrow and hide in a much, much, much larger space.
Interesting.
And then there's a constant access to food and water, of course.
What does a cricket eat?
So we have a proprietary blend formula. It's basically grain-based, not that dissimilar to what you would feed a chicken. So it's basically grains with some Vitamix, and it's very simple, very clean.
Huh. Interesting. You know what? I've never cared for a cricket. I've never had one.
Yeah, they'll eat each other. They're cannibalistic, and if they're short of food, if they're, they don't have access to food, they'll eat essentially anything.
Huh.
So we don't want them to do that. So we have to obviously make sure that they're provided with plenty access to fresh food and water all the time.
Interesting. What about mealworms? What are mealworms? What's their housing like? What is their food source like?
So mealworms are grown more in drawers. If you can imagine like a set of drawers that are stacked one on top of each other. Uh-huh. And it's also some basic grains, but you would use also vegetables like potatoes or carrots and things of that nature. And it's the same story. I mean, there's some guys using mealworms to clean up oil spills and other kinds of garbages. So they have a lot of utility as well. But again, of course, ours are raised for human consumption and fed very specific human-grade food.
Interesting. It's just all a very interesting concept. And then you think about how clean their intake is, gives out a clean product at the end, a clean source to actually be able to make something for ourselves. It's probably the closest holistic ingredient we can add that I can even think of on the market.
Yeah, I mean, and the great irony in that respect as well is that insects are so clean. There's this idea of an ick factor or that they're dirty. But in fact, when you look at virology or microbiology or you do any testing on other protein forms and what they contain compared to, in this case, say crickets, for example, and there's very little vectors in crickets that can make people sick. Very little.
That's so cool.
They don't carry salmonella, bacteria like that.
But even at that, I mean, let's just say, for just an instance, we actually used a cricket powder, and you put it into bread, into like a biscuit mix. You're going to cook out any kind of salmonella, though.
Well, you would, but in the case of crickets, you wouldn't have to worry about it because it doesn't exist. In chicken, you have to cook it.
True.
That's why on these shows, you could never feed people raw pork, raw pig, raw chicken, raw meat. You could never do that because it's too dangerous. But you can feed a person, a live cricket and they do that on these shows.
Yeah.
And people put their faces and let them crawl all over them because they don't carry vectors that can give people diseases, generally speaking. Certainly not like other forms of meat.
Which is just amazing in itself. Just that alone is amazing. So
Yeah, it's a kind of one of those ironic hypocrisies that we've like determined bugs to be dirty, and we say, you know, there's a bug in my computer, when in fact they're quite the opposite. They're, you know,
that's kind of funny actually when you think about it. You know, because yeah, I think it's just the way that they look. That's what's the icky part. That's the icky factor, is just that they're not attractive. It's not like how cute a cow is.
Yeah, I think that's largely, again, sociological, because there's a very romantic kind of image of Jiminy Cricket, and, you know, I think it's just all cultural. You know, lobster, mussels, oysters are extremely disgusting to many people.
Right.
But that's subjective. You know, I was saying to someone the other day, I think we should really try to reframe how food is seen relative to ickiness, and food that makes you sick and obese and diabetic and should be seen as icky food, and food that makes you well and healthy and contributes toward health and wellness should not be.
Right.
How it looks is just totally subjectively cultural in many respects. It's what you grow up with. It's not absolute or objective.
Right.
And that said, there are, you know, people, you know, Americans who are repulsed by meat, and there are Japanese who don't eat fish. You know, it's all over the place. There's no absolutes. Food is very personal.
Right.
But one thing that is objective about it is that there is food that makes you well, and there is food that makes you sick. Mm-hmm. There is a difference between drinking a glass of water and a glass of pop. That's scientific. So my argument is that crickets fall into the water category. They are very, very healthy for you,
to say the least. I mean,
yeah.
your analogy of water is great, but there's even more, because there's more benefits to a cricket than there is even to water. Water just hydrates. Crickets actually multitude of different properties that are just absolutely astounding. I mean, just in the facts, you know, we have the protein that's high in protein. We have low in fat, high in iron, high in calcium, 9 essential amino acids. The ratio is 6.3 of the omega. Gluten-free, has B12. It's organic, high in fiber, low in calories. I mean, it's so amazing. That's just, and you know what's great about it is that this is not a subject matter that's only for, you know, one species. It's not just a dog. It's not just a cat. It really is a multitude of a conversation. That's what really has intrigued my brain when it comes to it.
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, dogs are natural foragers, cats are natural foragers, and most of our ancestors ate insects. Mm-hmm. So you're correct. Yes.
It's interesting. I mean, and you know, being in America, it's a little bit different here. The culture, and I think it's still even in Canada the same way. Bugs are still not a part of the diet when it's on an everyday thing. When you look at other countries, this is very common, and this is not delicacy. This is just everyday nutrition. I find that to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there are billions of kids around the world that would literally starve if they didn't eat insects. In Asia, kids can go home from school and go forage for bugs in their backyards and collect them, and they bring them to school the next day. And, you know, the cook in the kitchen takes all the children's insects and puts them into a big wok and adds a little bit of onion and something else, and that's what they eat. And if they didn't go home and forage for insects, they wouldn't eat. But the thing is, nobody should feel bad for them relative to what they're eating. I think poverty and disenfranchisement is a whole nother situation, but the irony is that they're actually, from a nutritional or health perspective, far better off than maybe folks in the U.S. who are taking their kids for fast food after school,
right,
which is not good for them. It's unhealthy. It's only bad. There's nothing good about it. I mean, it may taste great, but so does insects.
Totally agree.
You know, we're not.
You know, it's funny because, you know, I always put the analogy of dry kibble, dog food, and cat food in the same category as fast food. It's absolutely processed garbage that, as you just said, if we were going to put our dogs and cats on that kind of diet, it's the same as putting our kids after school going in there. So that's perfect that you married the two just perfect.
Thank you.
Which insects are good, in this reference for dogs and cats? Which insects are really good for dogs and cats in their food plan?
So we're working with a couple folks here in Canada and the U.S., and then there's a fantastic company in California we're working with, Jiminy's, and I'm not sure if you've had a chance to speak to Anne there, but you should. And we're working with universities and food formulators. They've developed a great line of dog treats, but the goal is to work toward dog food, like hard and soft dog treats, and then dog food, and then eventually cat treats and cat food. So we're starting with crickets as the primary source of protein in the kibble dog treats as well as dog food.
Mm-hmm. And yes, I have spoke to Anne. Anne was actually the reason why all of this came about. I was actually prepping.
Oh, great.
I was prepping for her, and I just started to do my research, my typical research, and it just blew my mind. And we were talking during episode, and then afterwards off air, we start talking more about it. And she's like, "Yeah," I told her, I'm going to do a series on this, and it all came about.
Oh, cool.
Yep. So yeah, and was awesome, and she was also saying, you know what, you should be calling them up and having them on, because you guys, obviously, it's a great partnership right there.
Yes, absolutely, it is a great partnership.
So, how much protein is in each serving of crickets?
So there's 60% protein by volume. So in 100 grams, you would have 60 grams of protein.
Man. That is nice. That is a nice source. There is just nothing there. That is a superfood. It is.
Yes. Well, and then when you add and you marry the other 40%, which is, like you said, the fiber and the iron and the B12 and all that other wonderful stuff, it by definition truly is a superfood. I agree.
Just absolutely awesome. Now, I want to go into this one because you're in a great science right now when it comes to livestock. And I just really wanted to kind of go through a little bit of this. We've talked about dogs and cats, obviously, but you're also handling the benefits in feeding insect-based diet to fish farming, chickens, cattle, and hogs. Obviously we realize that fish farming is they're going to eat bugs. We understand that when you go fishing, you're going to probably use a cricket on a hook. You're going to use a mealworm. But what are the benefits for fish farming?
So let me give you an example, because we don't know a lot about it except to say that chicken and fish are naturally insectivores, and I think it's probably better for people to eat protein like fish and chicken that eat their natural diets, which in this case, again, are insects. Mm-hmm. But, for example, a shrimp aquaculturist added 10% insect meal to the traditional shrimp meal, and it doubled the survival rates of the hatchlings. So there seems to be a natural immune-enhancing benefit when fish and chicken, for example, eat insects. So again, it doesn't really surprise me, because you're feeding them, you're adding a natural part of their diet into a fabricated diet. But I think it's in part because there are distinct elements or physiology of the insect which may not only enhance the immunity, for example, of a shrimp or a fish or a chicken, but actually of a human being as well.
See, that's what I was thinking. When I read it, I was like, well, duh, of course they're actually going to eat bugs. That's gonna be a natural part of their diet. And the same thing was with chickens. I mean, I don't understand this artificial garbage that we're giving, an obvious animal that we're going to consume, and yet we're giving them processed garbage. I don't get that.
Well, I guess maybe it's inexpensive and efficient.
I think that's always been everything, and it's always been the answer to it. Now, I know that you actually say it says more information coming soon when it comes to cattle and hog farming. Do you have anything that you can share about that?
No, I just think that right now it's the groups that are really doing the black soldier fly larva, whose product will be more of a fish meal replacement or alternative, which is a little bit different perhaps than the value proposition of what we're doing. I think they're equally beneficial, they're equally important, they're just a bit different. And we're not focused on the black soldier fly rearing yet.
It's still very interesting, the fact that we're able to be this late. I mean, it's 2018, and we're just kind of going, oh yeah, this is what the source of typical chickens and fish and cattle and are would have ate a long time ago. So let's go back to it now. Instead of all the processed garbage, it just seems bizarre that it's taken us to the high-end science era that we're supposed to be in to finally come to conclusions that, oh yeah, that's why we should have been doing it the whole time. Seems weird.
I agree. Yeah, no, I agree. I think there are other examples you could point to where people tried a different way, an unnatural way, and they learned that, the truth of the matter is that how they did it originally was really the best, most thorough, healthiest way. Maybe it lacks to some degree efficiency, but that's up to us as a society. What's more important, quick and cheap or healthy and longevity.
But see, that's been the problem here is the sustainability of the old way. Yes, it was cheap, but let's be realistic. The processing and everything that we've been doing, it's probably more expensive than actually doing an insect base.
Well, if you include the cost to the environment and what it's going to cost to clean all of that up, et cetera, I agree. I mean, there's a front-end cost and there's a back-end cost.
Yep.
And, unfortunately, the meat farming is not good for the environment. I mean, it's just statistically true.
Right.
And insect farming is. And no one's saying stop eating meat, but if people just, once in a while chose insects as their form of protein instead of traditional meat, they could make a major impact on the planet. And more so, they could make a major impact on their own health.
And what really gets me, and I'm going to kind of go into this portion to it, and that is, this is, again, sustainability, not just for dogs and cats, but for humans as well. You can take cricket powder, and again, you can make some kind of a roll or something out of it for your dinners, which will be a superfood in itself. But the sustainability is just ridiculous. The benefits are across the board, very high level. I just don't understand.
Yeah, the best analogy I have, and I'm sorry, I have about 3 more minutes here. The best analogy I have is if a family of 4 chose to get their protein from insects 1 day a week for a year. So maybe in the morning you put it in a muffin, in the afternoon in a pizza crust, and in the evening in a soup or chili. The family of 4 did that once a week for a year. They would save the planet about 750,000 liters of water.
Right. That's crazy. So in our last few moments, the couple things I have is how do you actually make cricket powder?
So we basically cull the cricket at the end of its life cycle. We use ice to slowly put it to sleep. And then we use a simple rinse, roast, and grind process. There's nothing added. There's nothing extracted. We simply rinse them, roast them, and grind them.
Wow. Simple. Humane and simple.
Humane and simple and clean.
Now,
and
go ahead.
No, yeah, and essentially they're unprocessed, right? There's nothing added or taken out.
And see, the rendering is what's the real problem in majority of our food here.
Correct.
The question, one other thing I had on when it comes to insect base is, what about vegans? Is this something that a vegan could actually accept?
I think we need a new category. We have vegetarians and lacto-ovo-vegetarians and pescatarians and vegans. We want to coin a term, geo-entomarian, and that's somebody who chooses to eat insects because they're vegetarian. So for a vegetarian or a vegan who doesn't eat meat because it's so unsustainable because of the environmental, ecological footprint, or in the case of a dog, the paw print, then maybe they would consider insects for their pets or for themselves because they are so efficient. If it's health, then that gives you another reason. If you don't eat meat because the China study and other studies say it's unhealthy, then maybe you would consider it. So I think it really depends on the individual's reasons for being a vegetarian or a vegan.
Gotcha.
And if this product, so to speak,
so
this hour ticks those other boxes.
What's next for ENTOMO Farms?
I think we have to focus on a few areas, constantly doing R&D to understand more and more how these things work and what they do and what the benefits are. And that would be one piece. And I think we have to look at expanding because we're growing and where would it be best to expand, what regions, what places. We have to be more efficient and help bring the price down with scale and efficiency. And again, continue to establish a value proposition.
I love it. Well, thank you, Jarrod, for being on. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're very busy, and it has been a pleasure. And is there anything that we missed?
No, I think that was awesome. I really appreciate your questions and your interest, and again, just the support from all people involved in the media helping us to tell our story. So thank you very much. It was a wonderful conversation.
Well, it's always been great. Well, I'm Chris Green. Have a fantastic week. Bye-bye, everybody.
Okay, guys.